Hi there fabric jugglers, it's Babs here from My Fiery Phoenix, and we have finally reached week 2 of the Stylecraft Carousel Crochet Along, or CAL, designed by Sue Pinner, who I have to say is doing an amazing job keeping up to date with everybody in the Facebook group. The amount of support and questions and answers that she's giving everyone is phenomenal. So hats off to you, Sue. You're doing a sterling job there. And with over 4,000 or close to 4,000 members, that is a big undertaking. It's not like it's only 50 people she's needing to interact with. That's a heck of a lot of people to be involved with on a regular basis. So this week, the second pattern has been released. I've put the links to the Facebook group and to the pattern releases, and also to Sue's blog and all the other websites and bits of information that you may find useful to complete this project. Now, for this particular stage, we are moving from transferring this centre panel that you completed last time around into this gloriously carousel-like creation. So we'll be making 8 of these red blocks. We'll be making 8 of the cream bands, and we'll be joining them all together with the rustic looking stitches for the gold. Now, whether that's old gold or mustard, or your own unique colour combination, the process will be the same. Now, I've split this tutorial into 3 videos, just so that it's not an enormously long video for everybody to try and digest. In the first video, I'll be covering how you create the individual band panels. So I now have a great chunk of these here, so I'll take you through how to create those. In video number 2, I'll show you how you join those panels together so that you get your doubles, and then you get the entire circle. So you create the circle in video 2. And in video 3, I'll show you how to insert and attach the centre panel to the band circle so that you end up with this gorgeous, lovely squashiness. And now it really starts to feel like it's getting larger. When I first made up one of these little panels, I'm thinking, oh, that's not very large, it's not going to make too much difference. But by the time it's all put together, as you can see, it's pleasantly huge. So I can't wait to see how big the final piece finishes up. And stick around for part 1. Grab your yarn, grab your needle, and I'll show you how to make the panels. So before we get started, I just thought I'd take you through the anatomy, if you like, of this particular block. There's just a couple of things that I wanted to point out that will make it much easier for you to construct it if I point it out on a completed panel before we get started, and then I can just take you through the very basics of the increases, cast on the increases, and then just how I go through the counting. But I'll show you that here, and I'll show you that again when we're partway through. So to start off with, you cast on. You need to keep this nice and loose as possible, because otherwise you will you'll come into trouble when you try to attach this back to your centre motif. This will be too small, and you'll really be struggling to try and get everything to fit, because this isn't very stretchy. The sides can stretch and pull so that you can match things in, and in fact even the top will stretch and pull, but where you cast on, it's pretty solid. So make sure that you have a nice loose cast on when you do that first chain. What I tend to do is, through this pattern, I use the tail as my marker, which means I increase on the side opposite to the tail, my cast on leftover. So I'm always increasing on the side that has nothing attached to it, and then you get the nice gradient slope on that side, and you should end up with something which is flat, as I nudge the camera there, is flat across, has a slope down one side, flat at the bottom, and a straight edge. So that once you put the 2 panels together, you use the 2 flat edges together to give you this sort of angular shape here. And I personally found it very satisfying when I had my red next to my cream. It felt so much better than having a big stack of red That was like, oh, yeah, I've got 8 of these. But as soon as I put the red next to the cream, it suddenly popped to life, and I could see how this is going to turn it into a carousel piece. So that's the basics of the panel. Or the other thing that I wanted to mention is, if you're not quite sure where you're going, hopefully you can see against this background, there is a zigzag effect. So you'll find that all the stitches in one row are facing this way, and in the next row they're facing the other way. But that means that you can count your rows quite simply. You start off with 10. So for the first 2 rows you have 10, then you have 11, then you have 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and you finish up with 17. So if I bring that in slightly more closely, you can see that it angles across this way, and then angles this way, and then this way, and this and this. So you get this zigzag effect. So if you're not sure exactly where you are in the pattern, you can always count your pairs of zigzags. So that should be 2 10s, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and you finish up with 17. You're increasing 1 on this side every other row. And I think that's the basics sorted. So now I can cast on. So I've started with a slip knot, and we will be casting on 11. And again, please try and keep this loose, probably looser than you would normally feel that you need to for a chain. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Now normally I wouldn't keep moving my finger along as I go, but I find that this keeps it nice and even. So these are all the same size, which I think works very nicely for this particular piece. Now what we're going to do is a treble. Again, I'm using UK terms, so the stitch will look the same whether you're using UK or US terms, but if it's US, then refer back to the stitch names in your pattern. Otherwise it will get very confusing if I'm talking about doubles for Americans and trebles for the UK. So we'll stick with the UK terminology, and we're going to create our first treble in the 3rd stitch back. So that's 1, 2, 3 from the hook. And what I do, I'm just hoping that I can get enough shadow on here, is I actually put the hook through under the top 2 stitches. So if you look, can we get some shade on it? Well, if you look at the back, there is 1, 2, which gives me 2 loops at the top. It's going to be easier to show here. So we've got the two loops over the hook, and then there is 1 underneath the hook, and then I bring that through. I find that gives me a much neater bottom row and much more stability in the rest of the stitches as I'm moving through the chain. And if you're not sure, then you want to leave this stitch underneath and these 2 on top. Oops. So we take those 2 and 1 on the bottom, and then hook that through. Now I tried showing this with the red, and it was even worse to see on camera than it is with the cream. So I apologise if it's not 100% clear with the lighting that I've got, but I take this one that plait, it looks like a plait going underneath. This bottom one is underneath the hook, and then you have the top 2 which go over the hook for each of the stitches. Now, this might take slightly longer because I'm trying to show you so clearly on camera, but once you've got that nailed, then going through and picking up all the relevant pieces will be much faster. You don't have to do it this way, of course. You can pick up just one layer, or you can pick up any way that you find works for yourself. I'm just showing you what I find works for me and gives me the neatest look to the bottom of this particular panel. By the time you've finished hooking all of these, you should have 10 stitches across the bottom. So that's 9 full treble stitches, and 1 that's made up of 2 chain at the very beginning. So we're nearly at the end. And I find this is the trickiest part of the whole panel construction. So that's why I'm slowing down with my speech and concentrating, and why it's actually taking that little bit longer. The rest flows through really quickly once you've got this fiddly base layer down. And here we are down to the last chain, which means, all being well, I should now have my 10 stitches in place. So let's double check that. So we've got the chain on the end, and that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Excellent. If you don't get that base 10 correct, you want to chain 2 at the end and then turn. If you don't get that base 10 correct, you will be messing around, and you need to start over, get that 10 in place before you move on. Now, the next section that I think is important for beginners or newbies is where we put the first stitch. Now, if we're not increasing, which the side with the tail we are not going to increase, then the stitch does not go in this first hole because we're not increasing. That would be using this hole. So we're moving on to the next stitch, and that's where we insert. Need to wrap around for a treble stitch. And that's where we insert. So we've got our first 2 stitches. One is the chain 2, and the next is a true treble. So then we're going to move along throughout that entire row, and then when we come to the end of the row is the other piece that I found tricky when I first started doing this, which is why I'm going to give it a special mention, so that hopefully you're not going to find it too tricky yourselves, which is where you put the last stitch. I found that I was sort of building the work up and up and up and up rather than going along to the end, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment. I'm only a few stitches away because I was just getting myself confused with where the last stitch actually occurred and where I needed to insert my hook to correctly move on. So this is the last neat back chain. This is the last gap, if you like, which would give us 9, including the 2 that we started with. So we've got the chain 2, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then we need a 10th, which means we need to insert it in the last space. There is no space, so we need to insert it in the last hook, in the top of the last chain. So if you pull everything up, it looks like this is the space that you should be using, and if you insert here, you're actually going up rather than coming across. What you need to do is pull that open, and then you can see that's where you've actually just done your last treble. So the space that you really need to be looking for is underneath and to the left, and as always I've pointed that out without wrapping my yarn, and then you make your final treble in the end. So now that we've come to the end of our second row, we will chain 2 and then turn, and this time, instead of skipping the first space and starting our first stitch in the second, because we're doing the increase, we're going to go straight into the very first gap that you find, and we will then treble all the way along into every gap, and then we will find the elusive top of the last treble of the previous row, and then we will be able to position our 11th and final stitch for this row. So we're nearly there, and once you've nailed this, it really is just a matter of rinse and repeat. You'll need to continue going through the repeat pattern of increasing 1 on this side, and until you've got 17 stitches. So I will get up to about the 16 mark and then show you how I count that, just so that everything is double checked. Now this is the point where it can get a little confusing again. As I said, if you're not looking at it, if you pull it up, it will look like this is the stitch that you need to go into, but you've already gone into that one, so you need to pull it out. So if we're this way around, you need to pull it out, and then you can find the end stitch and wrap and then pop your hook through to put the 11th stitch in, the final stitch for this row. So if we just count those up, you've got the 2 from the chain 2 at the very beginning, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and you're well on your way to continuing on. So you just do your chain 2, come back, chain 2, go into the first space, continue along, chain 2, and so on until you're up to about 16 or so, and then I'll come back and show you how to do the counting, just to double check everything is as it should be. So here we are partway through, and I just thought I'd show you quickly how to work out what row we're on and the stitch count that we should have for that row. So again, I think I showed you earlier, we've got the slight zigzags coming through, and each pair is 1 stitch count. So we've got 2 rows of 10, 2 rows of 11, 2 rows of 12 and 2 rows of 13. So all being well, there should be 13 stitches on this particular row. We include the chain 2, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 and 13, which is excellent, and we are about to increase. So we chain 2, turn the work, and we're going to go for this first hole here, and that gives us our increase, and then we treble all the way across. Now coming up to the end, we've got our final stitch here. If I can get some shade on it, there we go. We've got a final stitch there that we're going to go through, and then we're not pulling up, we're pulling out, so that we can see where we need to put our last treble. So that's the increase row, and now we chain 2, turn, and because we're not increasing, this is the side that stays perpendicular or vertical, we are going to ignore this first gap and we're going to stitch into here. So we put our treble in the second stitch, and then we go along. And really that is as complicated as it gets. As I said before, the most complex thing I found is actually casting on this very initial row here. Once we've got the trebles created from that point on, everything else really does become very, very simple. It's a nice mindless one to do whilst you're watching the telly, watching your favourite soap or a film, and you just need to make sure that you've got 17 in your final row. So I shall come back and show you what that looks like when I cast off and tie off my last stitch. Here we have the finished piece with 16 rows deep and 17 stitches across the top, and I'll just show you the way that I actually tie off my final stitch. I sort of raced through that last time around, but I might as well show you, as this is a fairly simple process. So there's some spare time for me to show you. I simply loop it through one last time, clip away the thread, and then pull through, and then that forms a knot right at the end here, which just keeps everything neatly aligned. And one final thing that I found that I have done for all my panels is I actually pull them into shape, and you'll find that that there will be stitches that just sort of slip into alignment, and you'll feel that. You won't hear it, you won't particularly see it, but you will feel it as you're pulling that into shape. And you don't particularly need to block these. They do all end up the same size, which is very gratifying, and you'll work out your own tension, and as long as the blocks are all the same size, you'll be good to go for the next stage, which is in the next video, which is where I join my panels together. So you have your red and your white, and you join them down the centre with your gold, unless of course you're working your own colour system, in which case you'll be using whichever colour you've chosen for your stitching in between the bands. But for now, that's how you create these blocks. And if you look in the video, In the top right, there'll be a link to the next section, and the playlist has all the other videos in this series that will help you with the carousel crochet along. So hopefully I'll see you in the next video where we start attaching these together to form one giant ring. See you soon. Bye for now.